方呢，其实应该先说说今天的情况。我们知道今天是英国国会夏季休会后的第一天。那其实按照约翰逊早前的动议，而且得到了英国女王的批准，国会重开呢，也将会是一个非常短时间的局面。但是呢，今天呢，约翰逊将不得不面对反对党可能会提出的对于脱欧的日期要向后推延至明年的1月底。而更让约翰逊内阁感到紧张的就是，在他领导的保守党内部当中，是不是真的按照英国媒体所说的，有大约40名保守党的流派人士。流派的国会下议员会在国会倒戈，支持英国反对党工党提出将脱欧期限往后拖延的这么一个倡议。如果在今天下午我们真的看到英国的国会多数的议员支持将脱欧的期限往后再推延的话呢，那么可能会出现2个局面。约翰逊呢会公开表示不满，将重复他昨天所说的话呢，就是英国呢将不得不提前举行大选，而从此呢警告保守党内部的一些流派呢，这是你们做出的选择。那现在呢，约翰逊的政府呢没有办法来处理脱欧的问题，那现在要烂摊子要交给任何一个保守党内部的成员，或者是真的交给英国的在野党来解决，反对党来解决的话呢，局势会怎么样呢？就是约翰逊呢就给出了外界一个非常大的威胁性的信号。那另外一方面呢，其实呢今天下午就算是约翰逊呢没有看到英国的保守党还有他的政治对手其他的在野党的党员呢，真的向他提出这个倡议，或者是这个倡议呢拖延英国脱欧的时间的这个倡议没有真正的获得多数议员的支持，那在明天问题一样会出现，那就是英国的反对党工党呢会对约翰逊政府提出不信任的动议。那约翰逊他的内阁呢今天一直在忙的问题呢，就是如何来应对这2件事情。如果说英国真的要大选的话呢，从目前的情况来看呢，英国的民意在脱欧问题上呢仍然是非常的分裂的，所以约翰逊政府还有英国的反对党呢都没有把握真正的胜利的大选。提前举行大选成为英国保守党首相约翰逊威胁党内流派议员的一张重要政治牌。约翰逊的想法是在10月14号提前举行大选，到了17号的时候，他再次作为英国首相参加欧盟领导人峰会的时候，就有了更多的政治信心。但是显而易见的是，在脱欧问题上仍然非常的分裂。不仅是约翰逊代表着英国保守党，英国提前举行大选成为英国保守党首相约翰逊威胁党内流派议员们的一张重要政治牌。约翰逊的打算是在14号，提前举行大选成为英国保守党首相约翰逊威胁党内流派议员的一张重要政治牌。约翰逊的想法是在10月14号提前举行大选，到了17号的时候，他再次提前举行大选成为英国保守党首相约翰逊威胁党内流派议员们的一张重要政治牌。约翰逊的想法是在10月14号提前举行大选，而带着选举的胜利，他在17号再次作为英国首相出现在欧盟领导人的峰会上，到时他会有更多的政治自信。但是现实当中，英国的民意在脱欧问题上仍然是严重的分裂，即使是约翰逊所代表的保守党获得了提前举行大选成为英国保守党首相约翰逊威胁党内流派议员们的一张重要政治牌。约翰逊的想法是在10月14号提前举行大选，而到了17号。 大选成为英国保守党首相约翰逊威胁党内流派议员们的一张重要政治牌。约翰逊的想法是在10月14号提前举行大选，到了17号的时候，他带着选举的胜利再次作为英国首相出现在欧盟领导人的峰会上，到时他会有更多的政治自信。但是现实中的英国在脱欧问题上民意仍然非常的分裂。不仅仅是约翰逊代表的保守党，英国主要的在野政党，如果真的面临一场突如其来的大选的话，相信谁都不会轻易参加。凤凰卫视，陶杰、张盾报道。
Number one. Secretary of State for Foreign and Welfare, Secretary Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I'll answer questions 1, 17, 20 and 23 together. And with your forbearance, may I start by paying tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, for the exceptional job he did as Foreign Secretary and with the professionalism and integrity with which he conducted himself. We are concerned about the situation in Kashmir. I spoke to Foreign Minister Jaishankar on the 7th of August. We want to see a reduction in tensions in Kashmir, respect for internationally recognised human rights and steps on all sides to rebuild confidence.
Hugh Gaffney.
Doctors have warned that the political situation in Kashmir is leading to a shortage of medicines and hospitals being left unable to provide treatments for patients. This is because Kashmir currently receives over 90% of its medical supplies from India. We now face a real risk of major public health crisis in Kashmir. If this situation is not resolved, what steps will the government take to sort it out?
Well, I thank the honourable member, and he's quite right to talk not just about the theoretical nature of the dispute, but also what it means for communities in Kashmir. It's important that internationally recognised human rights are respected and fully respected, and the answer of the way through the tensions is by constructive political dialogue. The dispute between India and Pakistan in relation to Kashmir is for them fundamentally to resolve as recognised in UN Security Council resolutions and indeed the similar agreement.
Dr. Paul Williams.
Speaker, the Kashmiri community in Stockton South are understandably concerned about the safety and human rights of the people of Kashmir. Can I ask the Secretary of State whether he believes that there's a role for the United Nations or other independent parties to monitor and report on the alleged human rights abuses so we can ensure the Kashmiri people are protected?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. He'll know that there have been UN Security Council resolutions on the situation in Kashmir in the past. It is something that the General Assembly has looked at. Fundamentally, though, they also recognise that the dispute over Kashmir between Pakistan and India is for them to resolve. But he makes the points, and others will and have, that there are internationally recognised human rights at stake. They are duties owed to the international community at large, and we certainly will be scrutinising and looking carefully to see that they're respected.
Longfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was a big protest in Sheffield on Saturday of people who felt that the Foreign Secretary's response to the crisis has frankly not been good enough. So will he commit to working through the United Nations and the Commonwealth to strengthen international pressure on India to restore Kashmir's special status and to work with both India and Pakistan to secure a long-term solution based on the 1948 resolution of the UN for a plebiscite for the people of Kashmir to determine their own future?
I thank the honourable gentleman. He makes his concerns in a powerful way, and I understand how keenly they're felt. I have already referred not just to the UN Security Council resolutions, but the similar agreement. It is not correct to say that we have not been seized of this issue. The Prime Minister spoke to the Indian Prime Minister Modi on the 20th of August and the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan on the 7th of August. I raised concerns about the situation with the Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar on the 7th of August, and obviously we will be looking and very carefully monitoring the situation and talking to international partners in relation to it.
Alison to you, Liz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The large Kashmiri community in Glasgow Central are deeply concerned about their friends and relatives in Kashmir, particularly with the media blackout and the curfew that has been imposed. Can I ask what he's done to raise both of those issues? And I can ask further what he intends to do to ensure that the Kashmiri people have the right to self-determination.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady. On both of those issues that she's raised in relation to detentions, potential mistreatment and also the communications blackouts, I've raised both of those issues with the Indian Foreign Minister. The Indian government has made clear that they are only temporary and as strictly required, and we of course want to hold them to that undertaking.
Steve Baker.
Speaker, in Wickham, events in Kashmir are of the most profound and immediate importance to thousands of my constituents because British Kashmiris often have family and friends on not one but sometimes both sides of the line of control, and they're in frequent FaceTime, email and Skype contact just like anybody else, even to the second and third generation of migrant. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that in such circumstances they must have active representation, not just from their MPs but from the government, and that will he therefore join me in saying that the time has come to reassure them on the human rights of their families and their friends to ask for independent observers in Kashmir?
Can I thank my honourable friend, and I know the scale of the community that he has in Wickham. I believe it's over 10,000. I understand how keenly it is felt amongst Kashmiris in Wickham, but also right across the country. The issue of human rights is not just a bilateral issue for India or Pakistan or a domestic issue. It's an international issue, and he's absolutely right to say that we should, with all of our partners, expect internationally recognised standards of human rights to be complied with and respected.
Mr. Speaker, following the action by the Indian government in Kashmir, on 15th August, the day of Indian independence, a group of British Indians had gathered outside the Indian High Commission in London. However, they were attacked by members of another community. Would my right honourable friend confirm that the violence and abuse targeted towards the British Indian community on this occasion is completely unacceptable, as it would be against any community on the streets of the UK?
I thank my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. Any violence is deplorable. It shouldn't be conducted in this country or anywhere else for that matter, any individual communities. What we now need to do is try and reduce those tensions, but also on a positive side, build up confidence-building measures to allow proper dialogue between the communities in Kashmir, but also between India and Pakistan.
Mrs. Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I met with my Pakistani community and my Indian community who are very concerned about the Kashmiri situation. The revocation of Article 370 without involving the Kashmiri people was particularly heinous. And if Amnesty International is to be believed, and I think it is, we should have learnt from the Rohingya crisis to know that this is another crisis emerging now, and we must take the firmest steps to condemn it and do what we can.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. We are aware of the implications of the revocation of Article 370. It's caused interest and concern not just within India and Pakistan, but amongst communities throughout the UK and internationally. It is a bilateral issue for India and Pakistan, but it is also an international issue given the human rights at stake.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long-standing policy of the government that the situation in Jammu and Kashmir is a bilateral issue. It has also been this House that stands up for human rights and the protection of minorities. So therefore, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the abolition of Article 370, which discriminates against women and minority religions, is to be welcomed?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes the point that there are different sides to this. But the reality is there have been widespread reports and concerns around detentions, mistreatments, the communication blackout. There has been UN Security Council discussion on Kashmir on the 16th of August, and so as well as wanting to respect the constitutional arrangements within India and in relation to Kashmir, they do also have implications internationally, particularly as they touch on internationally respected and recognised human rights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer members to my register of interests. For over 4 years, Mr. Speaker, I have stood in this place and warned members of the ongoing persecution, oppression and injustice that the sons and daughters of Kashmir face on a daily basis. And that situation has now escalated as a result of the revocation of Article 370 and 35A and the humanitarian situation as a result of the blockade. The reality is we see up to 10,000 people arrested without due process. We see food shortages, we see medicine shortages. This is a humanitarian crisis, and the United Nations Security Council to meet and not even agree a condemnation is not something that this House should welcome. What is the Minister doing to end the draconian blockade in the very least?
Well, I think it would be obvious to the Honourable Gentleman, as much as I sympathise with his concerns and understand the heartfelt way in which he makes his points, that we cannot alone end that blockade. There has been a discussion about it within the UN Security Council, and the point I would make is that all and any allegations of human rights violations are deeply concerning. They must be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently.
Brevity from Dame Cheryl Gillam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like the Honourable Member for Wickham, I have many constituents that are highly concerned about this. The revocation of Article 35A actually affects the property ownership and rights in Jammu and Kashmir, and many of my constituents are very frightened that this could lead to a dramatic transformation from majority Muslim to majority Hindu. The new Prime Minister is famed for being robust. Can he now be robust in defending the rights of these people and their families?
My right honourable friend has raised the issue in the way that others have, but I think in a particularly poignant way. The reality is the issues around human rights we've raised, we've been clear both in our direct dealings with the Indian government, but also at the international level, that any reports, allegations of human rights must be dealt with transparently and thoroughly and rigorously, and those human rights standards must be respected.
McInnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alongside the revocation of Article 370, the Indian authorities have detained more than 4,000 Kashmiris without charge in the last month. Not just political activists, but ordinary civilians. There are widespread allegations of torture, and many families do not know where their loved ones are being held. This is no way for the largest democracy in the world to behave, let alone a member of the Commonwealth. So can the Minister of State tell us what protests he has made to India about those detentions?
Well, as I explained to the House, and I'm happy to repeat again for the Honourable Lady, the concerns and the issues she's raised are very serious. I raised them directly with Foreign Minister Jaishankar on the 7th of August, and to answer the Shadow Foreign Secretary's point, yes, specifically the issue of detention as well as the blackouts. We've made clear our concern, and that we need to see, particularly with a great democracy, as she says, internationally recognised human rights respected.
Mr. Speaker. Minister of State, Christopher Pincher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, sir, I will answer questions 2, 5 and 15 together. On the 27th of August, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, spoke to the Brazilian Foreign Minister, Mr. Araújo. I will also be seeing the Brazilian Ambassador, Mr. Arruda, tomorrow to reaffirm our commitment to working in partnership with Brazil on a range of issues, including the environment. In response to the very serious the Prime Minister at the G7 announced £10 million for protection and restoration of rainforest, and that's in addition to the £120 million of funding we provide through our other programmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, whilst we welcome the £10 million the UK Government has committed to helping restore the Amazonian rainforest, this is paltry
compared with the amount spent on advertising for a Brexit debacle. Can the Foreign Secretary tell me if the money is spent by local partners in a way that ensures Indigenous people will take charge of the process to reforest their homes and protect our planet, and what further funding is he willing to pledge today?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the honourable gentleman's passion for the issue. I can confirm that we spend £120 million through our international climate finance programme. That goes to help deforestation, it goes to help sustainable farming, and it complements the trading activities that we have with Brazil, which ensure the Brazilian economy grows and prospers, including for those farmers who are also part and parcel of the problem, burning some of the rainforest.
Zeichner.
Mr. Speaker, over 120,000 people have already petitioned this Parliament, urging trade sanctions to be used against Brazil to put pressure on them. Given a minister was in Brazil recently, what pressure was put on by the government?
My honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth West, was there as part of our international trade obligations to ensure that we build trade with our strategic partners such as Brazil. I will be seeing the Brazilian ambassador tomorrow, making clear that we want to help Brazil with its difficulties in those terrible fires, but also make clear we want to trade with them because that is a way of building their economy and ensuring the sorts of fires that are currently raging are put out and stay out.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, both the Taoiseach and French President said they will attempt to block the Mercosur trade agreement if Brazil continues its environmental commitments. Does the Foreign Secretary or Minister agree with me that the burning of the Amazon is a human and environmental tragedy that requires a global solution? And it's no time for fragile male egos or social media spats. And what steps has he taken to ensure that situations like these receive an urgent and immediate multilateral response now and in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope that the honourable lady will not think that my response is in any way macho. My concern is to make sure that the trade with our two countries prospers and to make sure that the Mercosur arrangement succeeds. It will result in something like 91% of present tariffs being removed. That can only be to the benefit of Brazilian farmers. It can only be to the benefit of the Brazilian economy. And as I say, if we do that, if we help ensure that these sensible trade arrangements are made, those fires can be put out and they'll stay out.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you. It's been suggested that changes to trade flows between the US and China may be fueling some of the Amazon rainforest fires. Does my honourable friend agree that all leading nations should be working together to stop this devastation, and what conversations are happening with other leading countries?
Well, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, met other foreign ministers at Gimnik earlier this week. He has made clear the concern that we have for those fires. He's also made absolutely clear the importance that we believe that trade has to building economies in South America, in the Far East, which encourages a better response to these sorts of tragedies.
James Gray.
Mr. Speaker, deforestation in the Amazon is indeed a catastrophe of global and generational proportions. We must, of course, do the right things about it. I very much welcome the pressure that the Minister has described. But was he also not aware of the fact that deforestation in the Amazon has decreased quite considerably over the last 20 years? While it's very, very bad, it's very much less bad than it was. And equally that the level of decrease, therefore, in the size of the forest has been reduced. And will the Minister, therefore, agree with me that this is a domestic matter for the Brazilian government and that we must persuade them to do the right thing rather than confronting them or berating them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly think it is better to talk rather than engage in megaphone hectoring. Deforestation has increased over the last few years. It's been increasing, in fact, in Brazil since 2015, some way before the present government took office. I think it's right that we engage with them, that we try to persuade them to use sensible methods to reduce and stop this problem. It is an international concern, and that is why we've raised it, and we will continue to raise it with the Brazilian authorities.
Latham.
Having spent some of the summer in the Ecuadorian rainforest, a part of the same Amazon rainforest that we're talking about, what other countries have actually made representations to Brazil about the damage that they're doing to the world, not just to Brazil?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the fires that are currently raging don't just affect Brazil, they also affect, for example, Bolivia. Bolivia is concerned about it, as is Venezuela, as is Peru, as is Colombia. So I think an international response is helpful, and certainly those countries around that can help Brazil with its difficulties should be encouraged to do so.
Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fires have affected 640 million acres of Amazon rainforest. And in his answer just now, the Minister has revealed that he does not understand the problem with the Mercosur trade deal is that cutting beef tariffs incentivises destruction of the rainforest. I want to ask him, what proposals is the government going to put forward at the Chile conference on climate change in November?
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady ought to know, high agricultural tariffs hurt the poorest. That will only encourage them to do the easy thing, which is to burn land rather than to farm it sustainably and to protect the rainforest. Mercosur is a sensible free trade agreement that should be encouraged. And in the fullness of time, I trust that we also will undertake a free trade deal with Brazil. More details of that, I'm sure, are to come.
Surendra Sharma.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Number 3. Well done. Foreign Secretary.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 3, 4, 6 and 13 together. We are seriously concerned and increasingly concerned about the situation in Hong Kong. Of course, we condemn any violence, but we absolutely support the right to peaceful and lawful protest on Hong Kong. The route to resolution through the current situation is via meaningful political dialogue taken forward under the high degree of autonomy that Hong Kong has under the model of one country and two systems.
Surendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the new Foreign Secretary to his position and congratulate him to taking up the role at a time of such calm. I asked his predecessor in June whether he would extend an invitation to any Hong Kong citizens at risk from persecution. Will the Secretary of State do his moral duty under the 1984 Joint Declaration?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, and I respect the fact that he's got a long-standing interest in this. Of course, under the one country, two systems model and its manifestation through the joint declaration signed between the UK and China, which has treaty status, we gave a range of residents on Hong Kong B&O status. And the importance, I think, of that is that we don't want to unpick one part, at least at this point in time, one part of the one country, two systems model. If we do that, we risk it not being respected on the Chinese side.
Stephen Hammond.
Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend to his position. Can I say I was pleased to hear his comments about the steadfast support from the UK government for the joint declaration of the one country, two systems principle. Can he make sure that we continue to reiterate that very strongly, because that is a mechanism for driving peace in this solution?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I've raised these issues with the Chinese Foreign Minister, State Councillor Wang Yi on the 31st of July. I also spoke to the Hong Kong Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, on the 9th of August. We support the one country, two systems model. It's important that, as reflected in the joint declaration and the treaty binding obligations that have been made, including to the people of Hong Kong, including to respect the right of lawful and peaceful protest, that that's adhered to on all sides.
Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I also welcome the Secretary of State to his position. The Hong Kong police recently made further arrests, including that of a 12-year-old girl. Violence is escalating, with reports that police are now using live rounds in conjunction with tear gas and water cannons. Can I ask the Minister, the Secretary of State, what representatives he has made to the Chinese government to ensure violence is met with a proportional police response and minors caught up in the protest movement are adequately safeguarded?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I have raised these issues both with the Chinese Foreign Minister but also with the Chief Executive in relation to the conduct of the police, and let's also recognise some of the violence on the ground that they've got to deal with. But in relation to disproportionate actions and overreactions, it's very clear there is an independent police complaints council carrying out an inquiry, and the point I've made is that that has got to be credible. It's got to command the trust of the people of Hong Kong, and that's what I think international observers will be looking to see.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's comments on the Sino-British joint declaration and how he's using that to engage with his counterparts in China. Is he able to give the House any information on whether international fora can be used to help support the case that we are making, that China should uphold its obligations to the people of Hong Kong for the one country, two systems approach?
What I can say to my honourable friend is that I share his concern, but also the route through this to de-escalate the tensions and to respect the one country, two systems model. What I can also say is at the international level, more and more interlocutors are expressing their concern about this. This isn't just an issue for the people of Hong Kong, nor indeed us, given our historic relationship with China and Hong Kong. This is now an issue of widespread international concern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Foreign Secretary update the House on whether, in his conversation with Ms Lam on the 9th of August, did he raise specifically the question of moving towards universal suffrage to elect the Chief Executive and the Legislative Council members?
Thank the Honourable Lady. I talked with her about the short-term concerns we've got in terms of violence and protecting internationally recognised human rights standards, which are, of course, as the Honourable Lady knows, reflected in the joint declaration. But we also had a conversation, exchange of view, about how the fact that you've got such widespread protest. This can't be put down to a small number who are engaged in violence, and there needs to be meaningful political dialogue that touches on the deeper concerns that people have about the autonomy of Hong Kong being respected.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The demonstrators have acted largely peacefully, but everyone in the House will have seen the footage of the police acting in an unjustified and extremely violent manner. With that in mind, will the Foreign Secretary commit to ensuring that the UK is not exporting crowd control equipment, water cannon, tear gas, etc., until that independent inquiry has been carried out and adequate safeguards have been put in place? And will he also encourage our international partners to do the same?
Well, I can say to the Honourable Gentleman, this is something that we are now discussing more and more with our international partners on all sides of the world. It's not just a European issue. Transatlantically, there's concerns as well. We've raised the issue of the disproportionate response that he's referred to. We've also recognised that there has been violence as well. And the answer and the solution to the situation we see is to reduce tensions, to respect the lawful and peaceful right of protest of the people of Hong Kong, but also to have moves and stepping stones towards the dialogue that will actually resolve this issue.
Speaker, I'd like to declare that I went this weekend to Hong Kong as a guest of a group of democracy activists to witness the overwhelmingly peaceful demonstrations. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that the fundamental problem here is that you've got people fighting for their rights under a two systems, one country model when the authoritarian state China wishes to replace that two systems, one country model with a one system, one country model?
Well, my honourable friend is very knowledgeable in this area, and I respect the fact that he has huge expertise. It's not clear, in truth, what the position on Beijing is. Actually, I think if you look at all the public statements, they stick to and adhere to the position of one country, two systems. And I think that provides the model that can actually resolve this. But we need to have respect for the lawful right of protest. We need to have stepping stones to build confidence towards a track of political dialogue. That is the route through the current situation, and to avoid it escalating any further.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Number 6, sir.
Minister Andrew Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are gravely concerned at the heavy-handed response to protests in Harare on the 16th of August and the recent arrests and abductions of opposition figures. President Mnangagwa must hold those responsible for human rights violations to account. We have made our position clear to the government of Zimbabwe. UK support depends on fundamental political and economic reform. Zimbabwe must now translate their commitments into actions.
Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that President Mnangagwa and his administration have been a grave disappointment to this country and indeed to their own countrymen? And would he agree, nevertheless, that the aid that we give to Zimbabwe, particularly the DFID aid that goes into education, is absolutely vital and has played an extraordinary good role in Zimbabwean education? And will he assure me that at the same time as keeping up the pressure on human rights and making absolutely clear our horror at the behaviour of President Mnangagwa and his gang of thugs, that we will continue to support the education system in Zimbabwe.
Minister Stevenson.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his question. The UK provided £94 million of aid to Zimbabwe in 2018-19. None of that money, though, is channelled through the government of Zimbabwe. I would reiterate the point that the UK ongoing support through our DFID work depends on fundamental political and economic reform in Zimbabwe.
Speaker, does the Minister agree with me that any semblance of the rule of law has now broken down in Zimbabwe? And we saw that just last week when a peaceful protest was banned at the very last minute by Mnangagwa. What more is Her Majesty's government doing to get SADC and the African Union on board to make their views known about the appalling way that Mnangagwa is treating the people of Zimbabwe?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I know she has considerable expertise as Chairman of the APPG for Zimbabwe. We are very concerned about the human rights issues currently in the country. The violations like those seen in January and August 2019 with the protests have no place in a democratic society. We will continue to work with all international partners to ensure that those who are responsible are held to account.
Mr. Speaker, I've spoken to the Chief Minister, Mr. Picardo, by phone on a number of occasions in the last month, and indeed will speak to him again later on this afternoon. We have regular ministerial contact, including through the Joint Ministerial Council with Gibraltar, which has met 9 times since its formation 3 years ago. Ministers and officials across government are working closely with the government of Gibraltar in preparation for Brexit. Gibraltar is, Mr. Speaker, and will remain a vital part of our family, whatever the shape of our exit from the EU on the 31st of October.
Neil. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer to my entry in the Register of Interests. I welcome my right honourable friend to his post. Can I also welcome his early engagement with Her Majesty's Government of Gibraltar? Will he bear in mind and make it quite clear that we fully support Gibraltar politically and in practical terms as we leave the European Union, and in particular deal with the practical measures of that vast number of foodstuffs and workforce that currently come across the border that must be resolved before we leave?
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one is more doughty in his championship of Gibraltar than my honourable friend, and I'm grateful to him for his kind words. Let me assure him, as the Prime Minister has assured the Chief Minister, that the United Kingdom will protect Gibraltar's interests as we leave the EU. And from 1967 to 2002, all points in between and since, we have said that Gibraltar is and remain a vital part of our family. The government of Gibraltar is responsible for its own contingency planning, but the UK government regularly speaks and meets with ministers, as I have said, to ensure that their robust plans are in place.
Mr. Speaker, isn't the Minister aware that whether it's Gibraltar or whether it's Hong Kong or whether it's Zimbabwe, people are struggling for the rights that they thought they had, and they feel a common cause with people in the United Kingdom who are struggling to get the political rights that they thought they had in this country? Isn't it about time we showed an example that we believe in parliamentary and political democracy in this House?
Mr. Speaker, that was quite a wide-ranging question, but let me put it to the honourable gentleman in this way. This government is standing up for the rights of people, the 17.5 million people of our country that voted to leave the European Union, and respecting those that didn't. We'll make sure that we leave, no ifs, no buts, on the 31st of October.
What assurances has the Minister sought from the Spanish government that it will respect Gibraltar's territorial waters both before we leave and after?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an important point. We reject and object robustly to all incursions into Gibraltarian waters. I think since the start of this year there have been 499 such incursions, and we have made 499 objections. My honourable friend can be confirmed in his belief that we will support the people of Gibraltar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister, I believe, supports no-deal Brexit. How will the Minister ensure the people of Gibraltar that there will be no disruption of supply of goods including food and medicine, delays of 4 hours at the borders resulting in huge economic loss has leaked in the document Yellow Hammer. If this minister believes that document Yellow Hammer is outdated, what is the updated solution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is misinformed. I do not support no deal. I want a deal with the European Union, a deal that works for Britain, a deal that works for Gibraltar. But I'm prepared to leave with no deal if we can't get the deal that's good for us by the 31st of October. We engage regularly with the Spanish government. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, spoke to Foreign Minister Borrell very recently about this matter. I engage regularly, as I've said, with the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. He assures me that Gibraltar is ready. We will make sure that Gibraltar is ready. We'll make sure that we continue that dialogue with the Spanish government to ensure free flow of traffic, people and goods across the border after we leave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 9.
Secretary. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 9, 10 and 14 together. Last week I attended the Gymnich meeting of EU foreign ministers. I met with the foreign ministers of France, Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands, Spain, Cyprus and Finland. We discussed Brexit, but also the wide range of international foreign policy issues on which we will continue to cooperate beyond the 31st October, from Hong Kong to Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I welcome the Foreign Secretary to his place? Could I ask the Foreign Secretary to confirm whether it's the case that the 90-strong negotiation unit has been disbanded? And if that is the case, with regard to our foreign resources and diplomats, what more is being done across the EU 27 member states for us to get a deal to leave the European Union?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. We've actually strengthened and increased the resources both in Brussels but across capitals to make sure not just that we're going to the EU with a very clear, reasonable ask backed up by the commitment and the resolve to leave at the end of October, but also with the staff and the personnel to navigate the nuances and explain our message very clearly to our EU friends.
Anna McMorrin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that trust is critical to international diplomacy? If so, would he agree that by threatening a catastrophic no deal and non-payment of the EU divorce bill, instead of being a global player on the world stage, he paints us as a dishonest and disreputable nation, much like his Prime Minister?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady. Let's agree on trust and the importance of being very clear with our international partners, both on the reasonable ask we've made, but also on our commitment to leave the EU at the end of October. What is also important is trust with the voters of this country who, on the Labour side as well as the Conservative side, said we would respect the referendum. On our side, we're serious about fulfilling that promise.
Nobody voted to leave with no deal, and the very threat of no deal is leading the pound to tank to historic lows. That's nothing to be proud of. Is it not the case that if we crash out, as this government seems to want, without a deal, it's going to diminish the United Kingdom economically, culturally and diplomatically?
Well, I respect the honourable gentleman's views. I think he would say the same whatever the position of the government was. I would just point him to, for example, the view set out in the BBC on the Today programme by Mervyn King, a former governor of the Bank of England, not known to be in hock to the Tories or to Brexit, but he said very clearly that actually we should get on with it and that actually the short-term risks were manageable, but there's also opportunities. That's the approach we take.
Mr. Speaker, I'll welcome the Foreign Secretary to his place for now, of course. But I'm wondering if he's discovered that, as well as being particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing, we're also reliant on good relations with our other European partners. So what impact will no deal have on our relations, and will he reassure our partners that this government still respects the rule of law?
Yes, I can reassure the honourable gentleman on all counts. And of course, one of the points that we've made to our EU partners, as well as making the reasonable offer that replaces the backstop, which would allow us to get an acceptable deal to this country, is that we're willing to cooperate on all of the no-deal planning and preparation to make sure that we reduce the risk on all sides. But of course, that will require the EU to engage to the same level.
The Foreign Secretary said he'll respect the rule of law and any legislation passed in this place, of course. But, Mr. Speaker, there is no mandate for a no-deal Brexit. The Foreign Secretary himself was among those who told us these deals would be really easy to sort out. And a no-deal Brexit that he never mentioned, as Channel 4 found out, was never on the cards. So it's clear, is he willing to do this damage to our relationships with our closest partners because the Prime Minister and the Brexiteers and this Foreign Secretary have no idea what they're doing?
Well, it's the usual froth and frenzy from the honourable gentleman. But the reality is no deal was debated on both sides, including by me, during the referendum, and it has been sourced. The reality is also that it was an in-out referendum. We remain committed to a deal with the EU, but the worst thing, the one thing that would undermine our prospects of getting a deal is to allow the proposed bill that the honourable member for Leeds is suggesting to go through. That would undermine our chances at this critical moment of the negotiations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I both welcome the new Foreign Secretary to his position, and indeed, seemingly his entire new team. It's certainly positions of churn. And also to pay tribute to his predecessor, who served for 12 months with a concern and diligence that was so sorely lacking for the previous 2 years. I hope that the new Foreign Secretary will follow the right example. He will be aware of the concern of people across the country facing health conditions like schizophrenia and epilepsy, for whom the Yellow Hammer leaks reveal it will not be possible to stockpile medicines. Now, these people will be left exposed and at grave risk because of the shortages that will follow a no-deal Brexit. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary a simple question? Has the government asked for legal advice on how coroners would be expected to record the deaths of anyone who loses their life after October the 31st through the entirely preventable medicine shortages?
Can I first of all thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her generous welcome to the dispatch box. In relation to no deal and the issue of medicines, the UK has a long-standing relationship with pharmaceutical companies through the NHS, hundreds of vaccines and medicines, whereby we do stockpiling without any context of Brexit because of the ordinary course of events. Both